We've discussed on this program at length what can only be characterized as an epidemic that is what heroin has begun not only in our area but frankly the entire nation. New York State, they're trying to tackle the problem head on. Governor Cuomo, he set up a task force, and so has the state Senate. Republican State Senator Terrence, he sits on both of those committees, and we had the opportunity to sit down with him, plus someone who can also put a human face on the problem, Bob Lindsay, the CEO of Friends of Recovery New York. You know, Senator, we hear all the task forces, the blue ribbon commissions and everything else, but very rarely have I seen an issue where regardless of politics, regardless of whether you're a law enforcement or if you're somebody, from the AC, there's unanimity that we're talking about an out-and-out crisis here in terms of abuse, and it picks no boundaries, whether it's an inner city, a rural community, a suburb. It doesn't matter what you look like. It is amazing how much of a swath this thing has covered over New York, obviously, and beyond. But it is an all-out crisis, isn't it?
It is an absolutely epidemic. It has no race, it has no religion, it has no boundaries. It will shake down really, really good families. And it originally started, I believe, and going around the state, it is from the overprescription of Oxycontin and oxycodone. And you have really, really good kids that have gotten hooked on these painkillers that went in for a simple shoulder surgery or a knee surgery, and they've become addicted. And it just morphed into other avenues where they've gone down the wrong path.
And Bob, it used to be, I remember, if somebody was on heroin, we're talking the end of the line for a street junkie or whatever. We're seeing kids go directly from marijuana to heroin. The affordability of it has changed. The access has changed. As you said, for many, the pipeline from somebody that, had a surgery and they were in recovery, and then the next thing they know, they can't afford that, but they can afford heroin. It's a totally different dynamic from a generation ago who uses heroin.
Without question. The issue here is really addiction. And heroin is one piece of that puzzle. So that when we look at this issue's been impacting New Yorkers and families forever. And like any other chronic disease, which is an equal opportunity disease like heart, diabetes, and cancer, it's the same thing. The reality is that some people, because of the way their body responds, become addicted to alcohol, drugs, or heroin.
One of the things that I know you guys are working on is a series of recommendations, 40-some-odd things that like these happen, is you want the healthcare industry, specifically the HMOs, to start playing ball with you guys, right? Explain what you're looking for them to do versus where we are right now.
A number one issue is insurance coverage. It is how many times in life are you expected to say you have to fail twice before we can help you? That's exactly what the message the insurance companies are sending to these people that need help.
So just put it in human terms, somebody in addiction, families actually convinced the kid or the person, the loved one, to get help. That's not covered right now, right?
They're covered up to 7 days, and then they'll have a reevaluation, and then they're covered maybe for another 7 days. Basically, they're allowed 15 days, tops up to 28. We personally, after traveling around New York State, have seen this is a waste of money. We would like to see a minimum of 90 days, 45 inpatient, 45 outside, a minimum of that. So these are things that we most certainly are pounding the drum on.
In terms of how to treat the user, and before we even get to the long-term care, it's interesting. I've had law enforcement types who said, we got to change the way that we approach this. Rather than lock them up, we got to suspend our money instead on rehabilitation. And it's interesting, Republicans, Democrats, I think partly because so many people's families have been impacted by addiction. Where are we right now in the reality of, do we still criminalize the user? Do we have enough plans in place to treat the user? What's the reality versus some of the rhetoric I get?
Well, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. For me, I have 11 family members living in recovery today from addiction. Real important, again, for the public to know and understand. When we look at law enforcement, it can be a very effective tool to introduce people and engage them in treatment and recovery supports. The reality is, for too long, what we've done is we've incarcerated people rather than to treat them and provide them the very help and support that's needed and necessary.
I've heard from everybody, long term, this is penny wise because it's going to save money. It's cheaper to rehab somebody than to incarcerate them. But it's going to cost funding, right, I would assume. Do we have the money set aside to really do the transition from the incarceration and also the judicial discretion here to do instead the rehab? What's the...
This is a great question because the fourth prong of our approach was enforcement. We know we're not going to arrest ourselves out of this issue. That's most certainly. So, great idea was drug court. Everybody makes mistakes in life. People deserve a second chance. We have a great judge up in Putnam County, Judge Jim Reitz, who's been nationally known about what he's doing and about allowing. I personally saw one of our United States Marine Corps veterans who got injured over in Afghanistan, an IED, 3 surgeries on his brain, and got addicted to the painkillers. Our system failed him, ended up on the streets, ended up robbing. He was going to jail, or state prison, for 7 years if he did not follow this program. He is now an unbelievable guy and is doing wonderful. But to your point about arresting ourselves out of this, we do have to have a little bit harder ramifications for the major drug trafficker. The people who are using it as a business, not the user, but the person who's doing the major drug trafficking. It needs to have some ramifications, and that's a bill that I'm sponsoring. And to narrow that down,
to get the kingpins. Now,
you got it.
This next issue is a controversial one. You guys have seen this, but you see what they've talked about in Ithaca, these shoot houses, and I've heard good and decent people disagree on this one. The premise for the audience who isn't familiar is literally a person with drugs on their person that's an addict can go literally into a facility sponsored by the city, ingest the drugs there, have medical professionals there to treat them so theoretically they won't die in some alley, and also provide them education and information about rehabilitation. Are you comfortable with that or not?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If we focus our energy and our finances and getting people treatment, so what are we going to do? We're going to kick the proverbial can down the road? That's all this is about. I understand that they are addicts, but let's get them help. Let's get them into treatment. Let's get them into recovery. That's what this is all about.
Finally, before I let you go, for both, if there's someone skeptical in the audience, if there's a skeptical colleague in the legislature as to, well, we're talking about a lot more money here. Is it really not money, good money thrown after bad, or not needed? If I let that person follow you guys, where would you take them to see for themselves just how desperate the situation is? And I'll start with you, Bob, and then I'll let you have the final word.
Real simple. All they have to do is come to one of the local hearings. All they have to do is come to one of our local recovery talks where people come in and talk about their own addiction and recovery. The reality is it is time to stop investing in the problem and start investing in the solution. And the solution is prevention, treatment, and recovery, along with the balance of law enforcement that really focuses on getting people into treatment and help.
The task force hearings that we've had would sober you up in a nanosecond. Absolutely. The horror stories that we have heard would just shake your head. It's you can't make some of this stuff up. It's so far-fetched, and that's what happens. So I would encourage them to come to any one of the task force meetings. My office is always open. If there's any questions, is there anything that we could do to help them, we're on board.
Up next, we'll take a look at some local headlines.